You are perfect. Hi. Um,
Morning.
so Dave, I asked him to join us. Did we meet at the Capitol on Day on the Hill? Did you come talk to Community Minnesota Resorts?
I did not, but I think possibly some of my coworkers did.
Yes,
Yeah.
someone did. We talked to someone about it. Okay, great. So that's how that all got started. There were a lot of questions regarding seasonal resorts, which we all have. And so some of us are year round, but mostly seasonal, I should say. So thank you so much for spending time with us. We are excited to hear from you and ask specific questions and things like that. Feel free to teach us all the things, lay down the rules of how or however you like us to do things as far as if you want us to save our questions till the end or pop up during. However, I know you've done probably 1,000 of these, haven't you? So yeah,
Yes.
okay.
I'm
Okay.
I'm okay either way. I think it's always best people if you have specific questions, feel free to just ask them at any time, either chat or raising hand or something like that. And or just jump on. We can and if I get to it later, I get to it later, but want to make sure people's questions, if they have a specific question, get answered. But I'm gonna do the overview and then we'll get into some of the details as well. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for spending your time with us. We really appreciate it. Let me know if you need anything. I'm here for the chat or participants if we need as well. So,
Okay, so for sharing, should
yeah.
I go ahead?
You should be good to go. I made you a co-host, so you could have all of the capabilities. Um, oh,
Oh,
Gail just wrote in the chat. Maybe that's not a bad idea if everyone wants to do a quick introduction. Um, my daughter is knocking me. Hi, Gail. Nice to have you. Linda from 10 Mile. If you guys want to introduce yourself, please feel free. Bonnie from Pinecone Lodge, outside of Park Rapids, and I'm at Two Inlets Resort, also outside of Park Rapids.
Mom, do we have sugar?
Mama,
do we have sugar?
Yes, we have sugar for the hummingbird feeders.
Yeah.
Okay, feel free to take it away. Thank you.
okay. I'm sure it was a busy weekend for you all, so thank you for coming to this session. And it looks like it's being recorded, so hopefully those that weren't able to attend can be filled in later. So earn sick and safe time, one of the big significant labor law changes that we've had in the last few years as employers, as owners, managers. You are very aware, I'm sure, of that there has been a significant amount of labor law changes over the last two legislative sessions. So just jumping into some of those to do the quick overview to say that earn sick and safe time is one of them, right? But there have been a number of others for people to be aware of, and we have good resources on a lot of these other law changes, both in the 2023 legislative session as well as 2024 on our website, through our bulletin newsletter, but also kind of want to just put this forward right now that we take 50 to 70 calls every day, and many of them are from employers, managers, HR staff, people that wear many hats, trying to just get information about the laws, what they need to do. So we're happy to just take your phone call as well. And we do have 3 people on our phone lines, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30. So we're one of those agencies that you can get through and talk to somebody pretty easily. So we want to be there for you in that way. But let's talk about some of these things really quickly. And I'm going to highlight a few that might be more relevant for you all as resort owners and managers and those who oversee those operations. So the pregnant and the parental leave law updates. So there is the paid family leave, paid family medical leave, which is starting 2026. That's, of course, one of the very significant big labor law changes that we're going to that will start in 2026. There's also an unpaid parental leave law. And so that law did change last year. And some of you may have not been as aware of that law because it's very similar to the federal FMLA law, but it now applies to employers of any size. And also the number, it doesn't matter how long the employee has worked for the employer. So for example, somebody could work for an employer for 9 months and they would be eligible under state law to take a parental leave, which is that 12-week unpaid leave. So until we have that paid leave, paid family medical leave law in 2026, this law has, there's been some changes with it. And we have good resources on our webpage. Minimum wage rate changes. This might be something that's more relevant to you. You may have tipped employees, restaurant employees, something like that. So starting in January, there's only going to be one state minimum wage with one exception to that. So there is right now a minimum wage for large employers and a small employer minimum wage, and the small employer minimum wage is also a youth minimum wage as well as for J1 visa holders. So some of you may use J1 employees. And so starting January 1, if you're not aware, we're going to be going to one minimum wage in Minnesota. This was a change this year in the session. And there is still going to be a training wage, a 90-day wage that you can pay those that are under 20 years of age. So 14 to 19-year-olds still will have a lower minimum wage for the first 90 days. That's allowed. Credit card processing fees on gratuities. Here's another one, again, likely going to impact some of you. If you're having tips, gratuities in your operations, I imagine most of you do. So starting August 1st, so this is a much more immediate change, any of those fees, like the 2 or to 3%, I'm not sure what the current fees are, that Visa, MasterCard, American Express charge to process the swipe fees, those won't be able to be passed on to the employee. So the full amount of the tip, if I tip $5 on a credit card, that full $5 will need to go to the employee starting August 1st. That's another one we'll have additional resources on. There is other changes related to employee classification, misclassification. This is laws relating to a lot in the construction industry, but in an effort to reduce misclassification of employees. Prevailing wage, and earning statements. So earning statements, check stubs, pay stubs need to be retained for 3 years now. Previously, there wasn't a retention schedule for those for record keeping. There's some other laws that I'll just skip to the personnel file access. So this one, if an employer does keep a personnel file, the employee can request to see the contents of that file. That's been a law that's been in existence for many years. What changed there was that it was expanded to employers of all sizes. And there are some other labor law changes we can see in the back in that bottom corner there on the right. We do not enforce, but there's been a lot of press around some of these. For example, the salary ranges on job postings. So starting in January, there'll be a requirement that employers provide the salary range when they post a job. That's not something we enforce or oversee, but and it's not actually attached to any specific state agency, but it is a new law. So it's important to track that one. All right, let's talk about earned sick and safe time. And the law started on January 1st. So probably most people are aware of that. And so these requirements are already in place. So, you all should be have earned sick and safe time in existence and moving. We are working with employers. It's still a new law. It's a big change. We're working with employers to make sure they're implementing it correctly. So we are mostly in an educational phase when it comes to issues of non-compliance, and we're working with employers still in that phase. But it's important that the employers get their programs up and running. So there was additional changes this year, updates more or less, and we'll talk about what those are. So who's eligible? This is, of course, the big question. Do I need to provide earned sick and safe time to an employee or not? And so the easy answer is that it's probably yes for everybody, for all your employees. If you anticipate they'll work at least 80 hours, they're going to be eligible. So potentially you're hiring somebody on for one event, a weekend, something like that. So in that case, you wouldn't need to provide them earned sick and safe time, but they're going to be working part-time full-time, even a seasonal, they're gonna be working more than 80 hours, so they're gonna fall under it. There are some categories of people that are ineligible, and we can see those on the right side. I don't think any of those will likely apply to you all, except potentially if you have some independent contractors, of course, those are not your employees.
So Dave,
Yeah.
sorry, just to go back one. So a lot of our cases, just so we're really, really clear, for example, is we hire typically seasonally, and an employee might only work once a week, like on Saturdays for 7, 8 hours, and then we're only operational from, say, May to mid-May, sometimes to mid-October.
Okay.
So a lot of our employees actually will not hit that 80 hours, and I think that's where there's questions a lot of times.
Okay. Yeah, so the law changed, so it did change to the word, and they added the word anticipated this year. The
Yeah.
purpose, the point of that is just to get to if situations where somebody, for example, is hired on full-time. Well, we know they're going to be
Right.
up to 80, or even part-time, you're working 20 hours a week. You're going to get to 80 unless something, was to happen and then the employment was separated. But in those situations where an employer is unsure if somebody's going to get to 80, we've said the employer can withhold the earned sick and safe time until the 80 is reached.
Okay. So in that time, do they still need to be well, obviously they'll keep track of hours with payroll if they hit that out 80, and then they would almost backdate the sick and safe. Is that correct?
That makes sense. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, that's super helpful.
Yes.
Or at least for me. I don't hop on anyone else. Hopefully I'm kind of covering what other people are thinking about too, but okay, great.
All right, so what is it? I think people know what it is basically at this point, but it's earned sick and safe time it's a paid time off program. It's the first time that the state has had a required paid time off program for all employers, but it only covers certain reasons to have paid time off. And it's the reasons on the screen, but it's basically to care for yourself, whether that be in the moments where I need to call in this morning because I have the flu, or it's because I have a preventative care appointment that I have coming up in 2 weeks from now, and I'm going to inform my employer that I need 3 hours off to go to that appointment. So it's my own care, it's family members' care. We'll talk about who the family members are that would be eligible for the employee to care for, but it'd be your own child. Let's say you're going to take them to a doctor's appointment. That's a valid reason to use earned sick and safe time. So sick and safe being the issues related to domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. So if the employee is experiencing any of those things and needs to take time off from work to address some of those issues, they would be able to do that. Bereavement leave as well. So leaving for either a funeral, preparing for a funeral, memorial service, those types of things are covered there. Closure of the employee's workplace due to weather or public emergency. So this is one where it is based on whether the employer closes. So the employer, that's your decision as employer to remain open or to stay closed or to close. And if you do close, they would be able to use earned sick and safe time. It's possible you're closing part of your operation, but not the whole operation. So that's going to be dependent on the employee's specific situation. If they're in the part of the operation that closes or the part that stays open, for example. Also, if the family member's school or care facility closes due to weather or public emergency, then they would be able to use the time off, and that's set up that way for unanticipated reasons that the parent likely doesn't have childcare set up, that type of situation. So the last one is related again to being ill. So it's probably tied to the first one, but and which family members are included. It is a significant list. So it's basically set up in a way that if you have people that you have familial relationships with that you care for, that the employee would be able to take time off to care for them, the legislature is taking on that approach that, you know, in today's world, lots of different types of families exist, and that somebody might need to take time off to care for different members of the family based on their own situation. So we can see it's a pretty significant list, but for example, a grandparent employee could take time off to care for a grandchild, and a grandchild employee could take time off to care for a grandparent. And again, it's to take time off to care for them, not for another reason. Like we've had questions around, oh, you know, I take time off to go visit them. No, that's not caring for them. That's a good thing to visit your grandparent, but it's not, that's not one of the reasons. So how much time can they earn? So here's the basics, and it's 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. You don't need to provide, if you're using the accrual system, we'll talk about front loading in a few slides, but if you're using this accrual system, you don't need to provide half, like if somebody's only working those 1 shift per week, like Kayla gave as an example, you wouldn't need to provide a partial credit to earn sick and safe time. You could wait till they had earned 1 full hour. And then at that point, they'd work those 30 hours. You could credit them on the next pay period, pay stub. Once they get to 48 hours in a year, a 12-month period, you can stop the accrual. And the year is any 12-month period designated by the employer. So a lot of employers are using calendar year, some are using a fiscal year, some are using some other type of calendar. Maybe if you're a seasonal business, your calendar starts the first day you start your operations for the season. And then if the employee, they can carry up to 80 hours over if they don't use the time. So I know we have situations where we have full year-round operations, and then we have seasonal operations. We'll talk about in a few slides this what happens when someone if there's a break and it's a seasonal operation and then they return the next year.
Okay, perfect. That sounds good. And I think that's kind of connected to Gail's question too about potentially paying out. So,
okay, so let's get into it right now. So so once someone hits 80 hours and has earned it, if they don't use it, and I'm not sure how I pay it out at the end of the season, maybe this is a payroll question, or do I add the hours, or do I just add the hours earned as hours worked? Okay, so the basics is that there's no payout requirement when someone leaves their job at all. So this is a benefit or in hours that are required to be provided when somebody's working for an employer. Once they leave the employer, there's no payout requirement. Now, there is kind of one exception that does relate to this seasonal issue, and that is if the person leaves an employer and returns within 180 days to that same employer, then whatever amount of hours they had would be restored. So I worked for you, and it's now September, and we're going to be closing up for the season, and I have 30 hours. If I return within 180 days, and I'm not, we'd have to think about the calendar, but let's say it is within 180 days, then those hours will come back to me. If it's longer than 180 days, the employer would not need to restore those. And then if I came back and it was longer than 180 days, I could start fresh from zero with Earn Sick and Safe.
okay.
Yeah.
Great. Does that hopefully answer your question, Gail? I'll keep an eye on it.
Some employers do pay out time when somebody leaves their job. That's not restricted under this law, and
yeah,
they pay it out for different reasons. Some employers pay it out into retirement accounts. Some pay it out into health savings accounts. Some employers pay it out as just a payment. So any of those things are available. The principle with Earn Sick and Safe is these are minimums, so employers can always offer a more generous plan of some sort.
sure.
So getting back to how do we provide the hours, there's 2 basic systems, and system 2 has an A and B, and we'll talk about that in the next slide, but it's either accrual or front loading. So it's accrual, as you go, you earn time. Front loading, you're providing all the time at the front of the accrual year. So that could be when someone starts their job or their subsequent accrual year. So the accrual system is 1 hour, at least 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. Again, up to 48 hours per accrual year, and then whatever is unused that they would carry over into the next accrual year, up to 80 hours, and the employer could cut it off at 80. Second option with an A and B here, and it's listed as option 2 and 3, are front loading, providing the time at the front of the accrual year. And there's 2 methods here, at least 48 hours. And when the employer provides is at least 48 hours, they would pay out any unused hours, but not have to carry over. So you're providing basically the whole 48 that we talked about, what you can accrue up to at the beginning, and no carryover, but there would be payout at the end of an existing employee. So that's not a leaving employee, that's an existing employee. And then the third one is basically the employer's like, I don't want to track this stuff. I don't want to do carryover. I don't want to pay out. I just want to make it as simple as possible. But in that situation, you'd need to front load 80 hours, 80. So a lot of employers are mixing and matching these methods based on the employee type. Maybe you have some full-time year-round management that you're going to do option 3, front loading of 80 hours, and you have your seasonal temporary staff that you're going to do the accrual method. That's something we've seen. Yep. And can the payment be on just be on the paycheck as hours worked? So I would so the law doesn't specifically say that it can't be that way, but I would caution you on that, because then it appears that somebody has worked hours that they haven't worked. And when you're looking at things like, should overtime be paid? Then you're getting into an issue where it may appear that somebody should be paid overtime when they actually haven't worked those hours. So typically it is a separate line item to pay that out. And additionally, check stubs do need to have the actual number of hours worked, just under a different statute. So if it was listed as hours worked and it wasn't somewhere else, the exact number of hours, that could be an issue there too. Okay, so the rate of pay, employers want to know, well, how much should I pay people out for these hours? And it's basically, the basic answer is their regular hourly rate. If the salaried employee, you're doing a division of their salary based on 40 hours, their weekly salary based on 40 hours of work. So that's pretty simple. We get a lot of questions around, well, what if the person earns commissions, shift differentials, overtime, tips or gratuities, bonuses, and employers do not have to calculate any of those things into the earned sick and safe time. So that makes that simpler. So none of those things need to be included. You could include those, or sometimes there's a collective bargaining agreement, you need a contract that would require them. All right, so here's some of the other key details. So talked about earlier that you can use it for your own immediate care for reasons that like a doctor's appointment, or let's say you have it's a regular chemotherapy appointment that you have every month or something like that, or every 2 weeks. So that's foreseeable. So we have these 2 things, foreseeable or unforeseeable reasons. And so if it is a foreseeable, I have that doctor's appointment coming up, the employer can require up to 7 days of notified notice. And you'd want to do that through a written policy. The law says that if you want to require, or you want people to inform you ahead of time, that you need to let them know how to do that. What's the method? You have a written policy to do that. So I'm guessing most people do have that type of thing in writing or in their handbook, but maybe it's good to refresh or double check the way that looks, and that employees have access to that information. And then the unforeseeables, of course, if you don't know that you're going to wake up with the flu, so you would be able to use it in that. And in that case, the law says you should inform the employer as early as possible again, in that situation. Okay, and I see some stuff flipping up into the chat. Take a look. So 2 pay rates, yes, this is a good question. Thank you. So the concept there, Linda, is that whatever shift the employee missed. So the example I give is somebody working as a cook and a dishwasher. And so if I missed my dishwasher shift, that's the pay rate that I would be reimbursed. If it's the cook shift, it's that shift. If the employee would tend to work 2 jobs during the same shift or something like that, you're gonna probably have to come up with some type of formula for the number of hours they would have worked in each of those positions. So essentially what they would have been paid if they would have worked. Okay, okay, so some of the other things here on the screen, when somebody's missed more than 3 consecutive days, at that point, the employer can request written documentation substantiating the need for the time off. So that is something to be aware of. A lot of employers have asked for those types of things in the past, and with less than 3 consecutive days. So something you may need to update in your policies. Replacement workers, you cannot require people to find a replacement to be able to use earned sick and safe time. We talked earlier a little bit about when somebody leaves their job. So again, when somebody leaves their job, terminated, whether they leave on their own or you've let them go, you do not need to pay out any of this. If they come back within 180 days, you would reinstate the number of hours they had. If you do sell your operation, there's employer succession, and the employees are retained within 30 days, then the employees would retain the number of hours they had. Increments of use. So this was something that changed in the session, make it a little easier. So basically the law says that whatever your timekeeping or time payroll tracking system uses, that the employees would be able to use earned sick and safe time in those same increments of time. So for example, if your time clock system worked on every 5 minutes, then I would be able to potentially take out 2 hours and 5 minutes of time. Now, probably not a good example. I use that because that actually has changed during the last session, and it says that employers can require people to use at least 15-minute blocks of time. So if you're tracking by the minute, you can say, well, you need to use at least, in my example, 2 hours and 15 minutes for that appointment that I had to run across town for, or something like that. If you have salaried exempt employees or people that you're not using a timekeeping payroll system for by the minute type of thing, then you can require they use at least 4 hours of earned sick and safe time each time they use it.
I think you may have covered the question, unless there's that Linda has about paying out at the end. Once again, as you mentioned, you do not need to pay out, if I heard that correctly, unless it's
Correct.
the front loading option. And then at that point, it's really her choice how much.
So the front loading, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. How do you pay out the front loading? The law doesn't specifically state. So I think, from our point of view, we would say the employer should be estimating the amount of wages. If you're doing front loading, you get to the end of the year, you've done 48 hours of front loading, the person has not taken all their time. So now you're going to pay out some of that for an existing employee. And then the question is, well, how much should I pay the person out because they work multiple jobs? The law doesn't specifically state the method for that. The department would say, try to figure out what the person earned or what was a ratio of the time they spent in each of those positions and pay them out fairly in that way. So, but we don't have there isn't a specific requirement on that.
And I really think in our case, most of our employees would be in the accrual, unless, like you mentioned, we have a year-round manager or something, which is maybe something that Linda actually would have in her operation. So
This is so the notice to employees, kind of a concept similar to a minimum wage poster, where you're informed. It's a way that people can be aware of the law and how it works and what the basic requirements are. This is done through a notice instead of a poster in this law. And so the notice is basically that you as an employer are issuing this notice to employees, letting them know a number of things about the law. And you have different ways that you can do it. You can do it through a posting. The limitation of a posting is that if you have a different plan or process for different employees, then the posting wouldn't be relevant for everybody. So you need to individualize it in that situation. Like, for example, if you had different accrual years, for if you were, their accrual year was based on the employee's personal anniversary date, that would be difficult to name everyone's anniversary date in the posting. So this is, we do have sample notices on our webpage. What the notice does is it tells people how much time is available, how they can use the time, a lot of the things we're covering in this presentation. It also would be an opportunity for you to put your notice requirement in terms of them notifying you if they had a foreseeable use, if they had that doctor's appointment type of situation coming up. What's your process for informing? Is that an email? Is that a call? Is that a memo? Do I put something, in a box? What's the process? If you do have employees that speak languages other than English, we do have the notice in 22 languages right now. The reason that we have it in so many languages is the law requires the department to translate it if we get a request from an employer. So if you have any employees that speak a language that is not on our list, please add it. And we had actually, we've had a number of summer resort and camp style operations make a lot of those requests because of they have some employees that are traveling from outside the country to come assist with some of those operations. Thank you for posting the link.
Yeah.
So there was an example in the chat of a check stub, and I'm glad that got posted. There was a requirement that employers put the number of hours of earned sick and safe time available for use and the number had been used in the last pay period on the pay stubs. That is a change. That has been changed in the 2024 session. So it's still not, employers basically need to still provide that information on regularly at the same frequency as the pay period. So every 2 weeks, for example, but it doesn't need to be on the pay stub. It could be in a different way that you're providing that information. So you could do it through a posting with an employee numbers or codes by the pay clock. You could do it through a separate piece of paper that's with the pay stub. You could have it in an online portal type of thing. As long as you're providing that information at the same frequency. So the two pieces of information is how many hours do I have available for use? And then how many did I use in the last pay period? So those two things. And you can provide that in different ways. If you're doing it on the pay stub, you've already figured out your system and then you've got it down. It's probably easiest to just stick with that, but you don't have to do it that way only.
Okay, that's good to know for folks. For sure.
Oh, sorry, Gail. Let's see. So I have employees that work mostly on Saturdays and will be using the accrual system. I don't anticipate many of 11 employees will use any of the time. I think at the end of the season, I'll be closing out the pay year. Let's say they worked 90 hours, they would have 3 hours and didn't use any. You do not need to pay out any of those hours. So in that situation, you're just having it there in case they need it. If they never end up using it, then they never end up using it. But possibly they would. Some of them might have a situation that came up, but if they didn't, then it just essentially goes away.
Yep.
All right. So retaliation is prohibited under this law, just like a lot of labor laws. So the employers can't basically penalize somebody for using it, discharge, discipline, interfere with their ability to use the time. One of the ways that is discussed in the law is through the attendance policies. So in other words, a lot of times employers have no fault attendance policies with point systems. And so in those systems, somebody typically will receive a point no matter what the reason is they're out. And after you earn a certain number of points, you might lead to a suspension or termination or something like that. So under this law, employers would not be able to assess points or have that type of system if somebody uses earned sick and safe time. And then additionally, based on someone's immigration status, there can't be discriminated against as well or retaliated against. So this is the part of one of the changes that was passed in the 24 legislative session that doesn't take effect until January 1, we can see on the screen here. And that's if you have other paid time off. So this is going back to that you can have exceeds. And so a plan that exceeds, there has more time off in it than what is required under the law. Now, if you're doing the accrual system for most of your employees, this won't apply to any of those that you're just kind of doing. We're doing what we need to do under the law, but we're not doing more than that. Then this is not going to apply. But if this may apply to someone like if you have a year-round managers or a staff that you're giving a more generous paid time off plan to. So the essentials of this is that if you do have hours that you are in addition to the minimum required that people can use for personal injury or illness. So if it was just straight up vacation time, that was the additional paid time off, that wouldn't, this section here that we're not talking would not apply to those vacation hours only. But if you had like a bigger PTO plan, for example, and any of those hours could be used for personal injury or illness, then the hours that are in addition to the minimum required under the state earned sick and safe time law would have some requirements around them. And so that employees would be able to use them in the same way for the same reasons under the state law, to care for the same list of family members, that the documentation of more than 3 days requirement would apply to that time, and other things like the attendance policy thing that we just discussed in points would not be able to be assessed for those hours either. If you do have hours that were in a bank that were prior to December 31st of 23, then you could apply some of those policies that I just said you couldn't. So this is a bit complicated, but it's kind of a case scenario that is you're going to have to look at, does this apply to a certain subset of my employees or not? If it doesn't, that makes it easier. But if it does, then just kind of looking at it and figuring it out. Since this doesn't start until January 1, we'll have more resources and information on our webpage this fall. So keep an eye out for that.
Sure, sounds good.
All right. So this isn't one related to public employees at the top, so I'm going to skip that. There was a change. And I'm going to skip the second one. Those are probably not relevant updates for you all. So resources would just say that, and I think Kayla, you put into a couple of the links in the post earlier into the chat. And so that's it. The best spot is just to go to our webpage, call us if you have questions. Always suggest that any employer sign up for our wage and hour bulletin. So that's going to be a once a month update on earned sick and safe time laws, these different requirements that we're talking about, and a lot of the other things that I discussed right at the beginning of the session about some of the other changes. So it's a good spot to just stay up to date. I know it's hard, but everybody's tracking so many things. So once a month you get an email update. Would encourage people to sign up for that. And I think that's the basic presentation. So I can stop sharing and other discussion or questions.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, are there any additional questions that folks had specifically? I felt like when we heard from maybe someone on your team at the Capitol, it was really like eye-opening, like, okay, we can do this once we break this down and actually understand this is accessible. So I really appreciate you breaking it down as well. Okay, Bonnie has a question, and both Linda and Gail agree that it made it clearer hearing from you. So thank you so much. Okay, Bonnie says employees work 550 hours for the first half of the year. She would not want to bank the sick time, but rather be paid. She just wants the money. How many hours do I owe her? Oh, perfect, Bonnie. Well, I think,
Can you hear me okay?
yeah, I can hear you.
Plus the trumpet, I'm sorry.
You're fine. Go ahead.
So I would owe her 18 hours of sick time, correct?
Go
Um,
ahead, Dave.
I'm just trying to figure out or think through the scenario a little bit.
Sure.
So the employee has worked 550 hours. Yeah, I mean, if the calculation is 18 hours, sure.
Okay.
Then-
So,
Mhm.
so now, like when she has a whole week to clean the resort on the off season. So she's sick on Monday, but she has 4 days to clean it and get it done. Do I need to pay her for the day because she can't come on Monday because she's sick, but she still has Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to clean it?
Yeah, so okay, good question. So it's basically the time is set up for when somebody misses time they would otherwise be working. So that's what I would, I guess, go ask back to you is, would this person have been working that time if it was kind of said, hey, you can work anytime this week,
Right? Mm-hmm.
and there's really not a schedule,
Yeah.
then that is getting into a bit of a gray area, but I would
Yeah.
say,
That's why
because
I'm
the law
asking
doesn't
you.
specifically state that, but if the person can otherwise just, if they can choose another time to work, then you wouldn't necessarily need to provide earn sick and safe time for that day.
So I just had this happen as exact same scenario, Bonnie. I don't know if this is helpful. Maybe you can tell me if this is an okay way to do it, Dave. So same scenario. I had an employee like, okay, you can work, clean a cabin early on Friday. She's also gonna come on Saturday. Her kid was sick. And so I just asked her, like normally that would just be fine, but I was like, you do have 8 hours of sick time saved. Would you like to use that in this scenario? And she said yes. So that will be the first one that I'm actually paying out in sick time this next pay period. But like I think in that case you don't have to, but you can ask when there's flexibility. Is that correct?
That's one way you could do it. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Does that make sense, Bonnie, in your scenario?
No. It's still like, so if she has 5 days to clean it, she's sick on Monday. I don't tell her she has to be there on Monday. Do I have to pay her the sick day on Monday?
No, you don't have to.
Is that right, David?
Sorry, I won't say that, Dave.
So it's hard for me to give blanket answers like that because a lot of this is, it's based on kind of a legal analysis and everything like that. But I think I will say it this way. It sounds right to me. And generally that sounds okay to that you wouldn't need to be required to pay it without knowing all the details of how your scheduling
Right.
works and everything like that. I can't give you a black and white answer, but yeah.
I mean, because I have paid sick leave before. I mean, she was out for a week. I still paid her half what she would have made if she would have made $600 that week. I still paid her 300 and then I did the work, you know? So actually she was doing better without this law with me than, does that make sense? Because I feel like if I really feel like she is in, that this is, I don't know how to put it. Do you understand? Does this?
So yeah, I mean, I
make
just go
sense?
back to
Because
it.
I think I'm good to her already, and then now the law is coming and saying, well, you better make sure that you do this, and so it kind of bugs me that anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out. So now, like I said, so anyway.
We acknowledge that these are big changes and that a lot of employers are not in favor of them, and that they do cause administrative difficulty, and but yeah, there's work to be done to implement them. So there's no doubt about any of those things. Can we just go back to like if the employee was anticipated to work and they missed the day, then they would be able to use it. If they were not, most of the time it's a set schedule, but in this scenario, you don't have a set schedule. So it sounds like the employee would not need to be provided earned sick and safe time in that situation.
Okay, this brings up a question for me because here's how my scheduling works. I have like 11 people who may or may not work for me. And here's what I do. I say, can you work on Saturday? Nobody has any, like, you have to be here, and they'll like me, no, I'm going camping. So I will put together, whatever crew for that Saturday morning of who is available and who wants to work. What does that mean for people? Because nobody has a set, like, you're working this many hours. Everybody's part-time, everybody's on a, like, I might have someone who works 4 days of grounds crew, but then on the third day, they say for the next, we're thinking they're going to work 4, but we don't have anything scheduled. And they're like, well, it's a teenager. So it's like, I have, drum practice tomorrow, so I'm not going to come.
Yeah.
And I know that's not safe and sick time, but just like all my employees really kind of tell me when they can work. I never tell them, but they're not independent contractors, because then
Sure.
that's a whole different, they don't provide all their own equipment and blah, 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 blah. So
Yeah, so that's kind of like an on-call situation, and what we said which can be like a substitute teacher. We've had questions around that, and once the person is kind of scheduled to work, and whatever your system is, and your situation sounds like, you're asking who can work, and then somebody says, yes, I can work. And then let's say that they came in and started their shift, and the flu that didn't come out in the night, but it came on in the middle of the shift, and all of a sudden they're in the bathroom the whole afternoon, and they need to go home. Well, something like that, right? So in that case, they would be able to leave and use any accrued earned sick and safe time, because they're already at work. But if they had not been scheduled to work, if they had denied the shift kind of thing, then of course they wouldn't be able to use it at that point.
okay.
Good questions. Anyone else have specific questions? I think that's good to hear that it doesn't have to be on pay stubs. I think a lot of us use different scenarios. I'm sure like everyone does, where some of us do our own payroll, some of us use services. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah, and we're kind of going back to something I said at the beginning. The department is still we're trying to work with employers. We know that you all have unique situations, just as some of the scheduling examples have just come up, and that's unique to your industry, the type of employment you have. So if you want to talk through those things, call us, and we'll, the laws are written to apply to all employers across the state. It doesn't necessarily take into account all these different very specific types of scenarios. So we have to figure out how the law applies to each situation, and a lot of times we're trying to work with the employer to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, great. Joel, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm good. Thank you for doing this. And David, the last person that gave us this overview was the commissioner. And so I'm going to tell Commissioner Blissenbach that you nailed it, and her presentation left us with a lot of questions.
Thank you, Joel. Appreciate that.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dave. We did record this so we could send it out. I should have asked your permission beforehand. Is that okay to send to our membership? Okay, great. And then I'll include some of the links that you sent to me ahead of time and stuff as well, and all the FAQs and your contact information if that works.
Yes, sounds
Okay.
good.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone for your questions and joining us. Please feel free to follow up if you have more. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good day, everyone.